drop some share some tips and all of the things just to kind of talk through surface level grant process. And so, with that being said, excuse me. Good morning again. My name is Kendra Underwood. I am a project consultant with KYS Consulting Group. I've been working with Karika for quite some time now in different capacities, and certainly glad to be with her on this journey, a part of her consulting group. And so, with that, my role is to work with our youth programming as well as assist with grants management and grants reporting. And so, again, glad to be here with you all. So, let's go ahead and get started. And so, talking about grants, Karika, I'll come to you. And so we can, just kind of talk about the basics of what is needed to actually apply for a grant. So, what are some of the key elements nonprofits need to have in place before they begin to even apply for grants?
Great question. So good morning, everybody. I think I know mostly everybody. But just again, my name is Karika Yarbrough Smith. I am the founder and principal consultant for KYS Consulting Group. And just to kind of answer Kendra's questions, I think there's a lot of pieces that need to be in place before you ever think about writing a grant. And I think that's a spot where I feel like a lot of people may go wrong. And so I would say, if nothing else, making sure that you meet with someone and talk to them and make sure you have things like your tax ID, your SAM ID. So sam.gov, you go and you get a SAM ID. You want to make sure that you also have your 501c3 in place, right? And if it's not the 501c3, there are other forms of nonprofit licensing that you can get. You want to make sure that you've already applied for your Duns and Bradstreet number. So those are some of the documents that you want to have in place, but I think a few things that are also very key to having in place before you apply for grants are things like your board of directors. Have you already established a board of directors? Because you're going to have to do your articles of incorporation. So that's another piece of paper that we need. And so when you have your business already incorporated, you need to also make sure as a nonprofit that you have a list of your board of director members. Then that means you need to also have bylaws in place for that board. So it's a lot of pieces that you want to kind of get in place in the beginning. I think when you're applying for small sort of foundation grants, things like that, it is great if you have all of those things in place. But when you're thinking about your larger grants, like your state grants or your federal grants, you also want to be prepared that you've at least already filed a 990. So whether you filed your tax form as a postcard or an EZ, or if you file the larger, you need to go ahead and make sure that you are in the process of filing, because they do want to see that you've had at least a year of showing some sort of financial stability. If you've been in business for at least a couple of years, 3 or 4 years in particular, and looking at larger grants, you want to make sure that you've had some sort of audit report, even if you haven't had a full audit, but just having someone, an auditor or a CPA, that has looked at your records and at least at the bare minimum done a financial statement for you. So those would be the main things. There's a lot of pieces, but we also can help with providing a list. I see that someone has a question.
Hey, Karika, this is Jackie Jordan. I see it didn't come up as Jackie Jordan. And yeah, I made it for a little bit because I have a lot going on. But anyway, listen to what you're saying. To the audience, I don't know if anyone else besides you and Kendra are familiar with me, but been working with various grants as a funder over the past 20 years. So, and one of the main things I will tell people, just from a very transparent and genuine space, is it's great to have all those things you're talking about. I'm dealing with some processes now, a competitive application process. But in all honesty, it starts with building relationships with the people, reaching out to them, asking questions, if possible, trying to build a relationship with the funder, even if you don't receive the money this time. Just like a job, I consider grant applications similar to a job application. If you can try to find some source or some way to get to know what these people are looking for and see what their history is, you know. Just like jobs, there are certain people who are going to continually fund the same people no matter what. And that's just the honest truth. It's a competitive process, but there's a lot of political influence with a lot of the government money. I don't care if it's federal, state, local, or whatever. There's a lot of politics involved. And when I say politics, it's who you know versus what you know. I've dealt with grant applications that were complete garbage. And you know, but depending on who that person was and who the political influence was, there was a message to make sure you worked with those people to get things done and make sure they did receive the money. So I don't want to slight that part of it. It's a lot of work. I tell people don't give up. And another thing, people don't never ask the funder, why was I not funded? And some funders are very I've been very transparent. In fact, I've had to deal with some issues where I'm at now about being too forthcoming with folk about, you know, these grant opportunities and what to expect. So I just wanted to, you know, add that little piece in right now.
And I appreciate that, Jackie. Just so that everybody knows too, Jackie was going to assist us with this webinar today because she's a wealth of knowledge for grants. And I worked with Jackie for many years. Kendra worked with Jackie for many years and learned a lot from her about grants. But I know she's got a lot on her plate today, so she won't probably be with us the entire time. But I 100% agree with you, Jackie. I think that's one thing that we talked about, making sure that we highlight, if nothing else today, is talking a lot about the relationships and having those conversations up front, because it's a lot of challenges. And we know that, you know, people's relationships are everything. So thank you, Jackie.
I agree too. And I think even kind of putting it into perspective of like it's a job, right? Making sure that we're following up, making sure that we're building the relationships, making sure that we are having those conversations. I think that's very important. So thank you for adding that, Miss Jackie. Karika too, like what are a couple of places or sites that small organizations or newer organizations can kind of go to search for grants?
So that's a good question. I think there's a lot of sites, and I know that there are a couple other people. Jackie, I don't know, Monica, you might have some thoughts on this too. I think it's always good if you can register for one of the grant sites to actually be able to look for things like grants.gov is one really good one. There's one called Grant Watch that is sometimes I think it actually, you can get some free information. But I would say that you also want to do things like Blue Cross and Blue Shield sends out an email notice. I think there's a lot of different sites that you can go on and look for grants. But I think one big thing is you can look at your city and county and like state agencies that do grant funding and try to look like DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, the Governor's Crime Commission. They do grant funding. You can look at some of those agencies. You can look at your local cities and towns, but I think not dismissing things like foundations. And, you know, every corporation almost has some sort of charitable giving. Figuring out what those are also really big things. But I think one other thing that we actually will make sure that we're sharing with everyone on the call today also is we have a document that we created called the Quarterly Grant Finder. And so we can send that out to people with some of the grants that we've located, and we try to do it by category, especially if there's certain levels of work that you do or types of work that you do. And so what we'll do for everybody on the call today is we'll kind of send out one as a sample so that you can see with some, and it has some funding opportunities, about I think 8 or 10 that are all open currently. We try to include ones that have deadlines, but also are rolling. We try to include some that are small that might be, you know, 15 or 20,000, but we might also try to include ones that might be 100,000 or 200,000. So trying to help because all different agencies have different needs. I would say that the other one that a lot of people use is called Instrumental. That's another really good site. And Jackie, I think, put a comment in there too, also just using AI to kind of ask those questions. And I think now it's a big thing. You can, you know, type in AI and ask what type of funding, with the type of funding opportunities that you have, what are some of the places that you can support that can support what you're trying to do? So that's a great question. Or great comment, Jackie. And I also think that's another big thing she said about fact checking, because that's the one thing a lot of people will recommend, that you use AI for a lot of things. And I think it's great, but you have to use AI, not let it use you. And what I mean by that is the number of times there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be information that might be not fully accurate. So you don't want to just assume that everything that you get for a grant application or a grant question that you're responding to is spot on, because, they're humans made the machine, right? So there's always that editing, because the number of times, because I'm a peer reviewer, I chair peer reviews for federal agencies. I know Kendra does a lot of peer review as well. And what we see a lot of times when we're looking at people's applications is you can see sometimes the ones that may have used AI, but not in the right way, because all the information is pretty generic, it's standard, has nothing to do with their actual organization. So just trying to remember some of those things too are really important.
Thanks, Karika, for adding that. And Miss Jackie, too. I think it is important, even that comment, making sure that we use AI the appropriate way, because again, it's been a lot of times where you can just look at something and tell that it has been AI generated, like it doesn't have any heart or any type of emotion or any, feelings in it. It's just literally generic. And so just making sure that we are mindful of how we do use AI. Miss Monica, I'm going to come to you. And before I do this too, I want to say, because I know we had some additional participants join, we want this conversation to be extremely informal. So if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute. But we want this to be a conversation because, again, we want you all to be able to take back this information to your organizations or to your communities to be able to implement, how to write a grant, right? The process that it takes. So again, we want it to be extremely informal. Any questions that you have, please feel free to ask them. So Miss Monica, I'll come to you because I know that you also do a lot of grant writing and grant searching, but how do you go about deciding if a grant is the right fit before applying for the opportunity?
So I'm gonna piggyback on what was just said. I actually use instrumentals as a tool to find grants. So that's been one of the newest ones. It's not cheap, but it's worth it. And so that's been really helpful. Before I use instrumentals, I someone said early on the call, the relationship building. I think that's what really definitely helped, because once you start building those relationships with funders, even if you didn't get a grant from them, they know now about your organization. So they're able to, keep you in mind, and then they'll start sending you like potential grant opportunities. So that's one of the areas. What do I do when I'm looking for a grant? One, I need to vet what I'm looking at, and I always vet it. It's like, okay, this looks good, but I'm not all find that funding in particular. I want to make sure that it truly aligns with our mission. So when I get a grant opportunity that I go really deep. So like instrumentals in particular, since we were talking about the instrumentals will pull and filter any particular, I guess, area of focus that you're looking. So for us, we are typically looking for grants that are DV focused or essay focused, youth focused, and art. It will pull those grants for me. It's based on where I'm located and everything. And it pulls a lot. It's like, oh, this is great. So you can start going through and heartening it like, oh, I want to see this one. I want to see that one. But what I do is I'll look at them and then I'm going to the organization. I'm going to their website. I'm looking at who they funded before. I'm looking at, does this truly match and align with our organization and our mission? And sometimes it doesn't. Even though like a system like Instrumental says like picked it out for me, it doesn't always align. And sometimes I just have to say, you know what, that's fine. So I really like to look behind the scenes. I want to see what their mission is. I want to see what they stand for. I want to see who are the people sitting on their board. I want to I also like to look at that because I want to know, do I know any other people sitting on their board as well?
It looks like Monica's frozen. Oh my. But I can add to it while we figure out what's going on with her. I think there's a lot of pieces when we're thinking about like where to look. I think but your question was more about what's the right fit, right, Kendra?
Right. Yeah.
I think for me, just thinking about Monica's saying, and Monica is the executive director for a safe space in Durham, and they do a lot of things with youth, specifically around dating violence, sexual assault, and things like that. Monica, we've known for quite some time and does a lot of work, even with helping other executive directors navigate what the landscape of kind of advocacy looks like in funding. And so we had asked Monica to join us as well, because I know she has a wide variety of experience in this. But I think Monica's talked a lot about making sure that it's aligned with your mission. And I can't stress that part enough, because one of the things that we see quite a bit is just people trying their best to get money. And specifically around that, you're going for things that have nothing to do with the work that you do. And so sometimes when you do that, it makes it a whole lot harder to be able to sustain the funding and manage the funding and also do the work. How can you meet those deliverables? So I think the other piece is making sure that you're looking at the eligibility requirements for the grant. I don't know how many times people have sent me a grant and said, we want to apply for this. And when I look at the eligibility requirements for that grant versus what the organization has in place or does, it has nothing to do with them. And so sometimes you will spend time, having your admin team or whoever working on a grant that you don't even qualify, and then you've taken the time to submit it, and it makes you feel bad that you didn't get something, but you didn't get it because you weren't even eligible for it in the first place. Or we might do peer reviews and they're screened out. There's so many applications screened out before they ever even get to the review process. Because of that, I would say another thing is thinking about what are the reporting requirements for a lot of those grants? Because a lot of times when you're thinking about what you need to do to report or to remain in compliance and all of those things, are you able to do that? Is your agency in a place that you can do that? I see that Jackie was also saying a couple things in the chat about just making sure that if you haven't been funded or applied or ready to apply, to create your brand and reputation with the actual funder. And I think that, my next point was about making sure that you are checking to see what are those funders' main priorities. What are their priorities? What do they like to fund? So sometimes, even though you're an agency who you see on the list that, Stand Up Speak Out, that's Monica's agency, has been funded and she does similar work to you, that doesn't mean that Monica submitted for a project that is just like the project that you want to submit for. So just making sure that your priorities are also in line with theirs. Also making sure that you are thinking about, so one thing that I think a lot of grants will do is you might apply for a grant, but let's say that this grant is for $10,000. And that's great, but is the effort that you have to put in to receive the funding, manage the funding, and report on the funding going to outweigh the actual financial support that you're getting? So you want to make sure that you are applying for projects that will actually give you some sort of benefit. You don't want it to become a burden on your agency. And then also, if you're applying for certain things, making sure that you have an ability to sustain those projects, because you never want to hire a person for a grant for a year or 2 years and then you don't have any more money, no way to sustain it, no way. And now that person is out of a job and you're out of, probably a great employee. So it's like, how do you find ways to tie that into what you're doing? And Jackie, yep, you said exactly what I was thinking. What is your capacity to handle the expectations of the funders? Because sometimes you have some funders who don't ask you for anything other than a final report once they give you a check. But you have other funders that you're meeting with monthly. They have calls, they have meetings, they have trainings that you have to show up to. They have reporting requirements along the way. One of the funders that we have a lot of clients with, for instance, you know, there is monthly things that you have to do. There are quarterly things. There are things that you need to do yearly. And then they're going to throw in a bunch of surprise things. So the thing is just making sure that you have that capacity in-house to manage that.
Thank you both. And I think too, Monica, that you said, I really like the fact that you said that you are looking at the board and figuring out if you know anyone on the board, because again, it goes back to those relationships. That person that is on the board can speak to the work, can speak to who you are as a person, to be able to kind of assist with potentially getting that opportunity. So I do like that. And I took that nugget. So thank you for sharing that. Also, too, as we're kind of talking about, you know, submitting grants, what are the most common mistakes that you all see in grant applications? Karika, I'll start with you, but Monica, or if anyone else want to comment, chime in. Miss Jackie.
And I would definitely say, I'm sure Jackie has quite a few things for that one too. But I would say for me in particular, not having accurate data and not having accurate information is one thing. But I think one of the biggest things to me about a grant application is trying to use the same application to apply to multiple funders. Because what we see is a lot of the larger agencies that teach grant writing, they teach you to just create this wonderful project application and just send it out to a bunch of funders. That does not work. Most funders have very specific eligibility requirements. They have specific categories. There's specific questions that you have to answer in order to score well on those grants, right? And so in order to do that, you have to make sure that every application is tailored directly to that funder and what they're asking for. So I think to me, that's one of the biggest mistakes, is just making sure that the application is tailored to the funder, and making sure that you have accurate data and that you're really highlighting the work that your agency already does. Because when they ask a question, they don't want you to just answer the question. They want to understand, how does this relate to the work that you're doing and what you're doing, and how will them giving you this funding, you know, improve something or change something. So being very, very cautious about making sure you're showing your outcomes and what those anticipated expected outcomes will be.
Is there anyone in the audience willing to put something in the chat about something, one or two things that they've experienced that cause them to rethink how they approach the whole grant development process? Because I would assume the people on the participating today are here because they've probably had some form of interaction with this whole grant development thing. So I would ask that before I make another comment.
Okay, great question. If anybody wants to either put it in the chat, or if you want to just say anything out loud related to that, feel free.
I would say, I'm Derek, Executive Director with Mindset Kids. I would say more so dealing with the political side of things. I've seen times where we have actually written grants and we actually scored high on them, actually scored higher than other funders, or not funders, but other participants, and we still didn't get them. And that's even after asking them, like, what could we have done better? And they send us something back actually telling us, like, somewhat why, but it's still, you know, discouraging to know you actually score higher than someone else and you still didn't receive it.
And with that, Derek, I would recommend with the funder having a conversation with, trying to find a way to have a casual conversation with management. And I say that to get to this, because then it really it's intentionally having a conversation and making them aware that, hey, we see what's going on and we see what you put in writing. We're not trying to cause any bad vibes, but we want to have that one-on-one with you. So, you know, they can have a level of integrity, force them to be, you know, stand behind what they say. And that's what I tell everybody. You know, if the funder can't explain to you why, don't give up. Just say, hey, when you have some time, I'd like to schedule, you know, an opportunity to just have a quick conversation. You don't want to make them feel like it's going to be confrontational, and that's another way to build a relationship with them. So that's how I say, handle some of those political things. And I'll be quiet while I think Earlene has something to say.
I just wanted to say, you all have mentioned things that have worked for me, and that's relationship building. Get to know folk. When I worked in my previous employment, there was a donor who donated a lot of money. So we kept up with when their anniversary was. We knew that she liked peppermint ice cream for the holidays. So we made sure that we checked in with her. Did you find your peppermint candy ice cream? Little personal things. These were individuals who donated to us. But relationship is so important. And yes, there are some foundations that they don't want anything but an end of year report. They'll ask you 3 questions, but they also require a lot of meetings and training opportunities for you. And that can be time consuming. And sometimes you just have to say, I love this, thank you, but can we renegotiate coming to the meetings? And is there anything we can do? Maybe not coming every time. So I think while we're getting monies from the funder, and we have to also be mindful of what works for us best, because if you spend all your time in the meeting, you can't get any work done, but yet you need that $100,000, right? So I think relationship building and truth telling. Don't say you're going to end poverty and hunger and you know you're not going to do that. So truth telling is also important because it will come back to see you. I've seen that happen. So those are my experiences, and I wanted to share with you. And I've appreciated all the things that I've heard. You've given me some good ideas, and my apologies for being a little late. I was in one of those meetings.
You are fine, Miss Earlene, and I think it's important that you highlighted all the extra things that some of those funders might want, even if they just want a report. And you reminded me of something that we need to make sure we're sharing with people, because a lot of funders who do foundation grants also will want a lot of pictures. So they actually want to see the work that you do. And so just making sure that if you do accept foundation dollars or corporate money, that you are reading to see if they're going to require it. But sometimes they're going to ask you and they didn't even tell you. So maybe just taking some pictures of different events or things that you're doing would also be helpful. I see that Chanel also commented that she's new and has often backed off because it seems so overwhelming. And I think that's something we're going to talk about in a little bit, because I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people. But actually, I know that there's a couple people I want to ask that question to. So maybe we just go ahead and ask it now. But, I would say to Monica and Derek in particular, when you're thinking about this, like it really is hard sometimes handling a lot of the challenges that are kind of thrown your way once you do get awarded a grant, whether it's delays in them starting the actual project, giving you the money, or if it has something to do, we know government shutdowns, that's been a recent challenge. Even just being able to hire staff and things, and looking at having changes within your projects. How are y'all, Derek and Monica in particular, anybody else can chime in, but I just know that they've both been working on this a lot with their agencies. How are y'all handling this?
Well, I would say for us, the biggest thing when actually getting into this, I believe, will be finding you an admin or consultant that actually knows a lot about, grant funding. Because you need somebody that can actually speak the language, that knows how everything operates. Because a lot of this stuff can be real tricky, and they're not going to tell you that stuff. So you really need to find someone that can do all those things for you, at least is very knowledgeable about, grants and things of that nature. That's where I would say kind of start, especially if you're new to it. That would be because you got to speak the language. You don't speak the language, they're gonna keep, you're gonna get burnt out for sure. That would just be my take on it.
Thanks, Monica.
I'm gonna try this again, but if I get frozen, y'all tell me. Don't have me sitting on here frozen place looking crazy, okay?
It was only for a second, we promised. We heard all the wonderful information. It was at the very tail end.
Okay. I might come off camera here.
Yes, it's freezing up a little bit more, so you might have to turn your camera off.
I'm gonna turn my camera off. Can you hear me?
Oh, it's perfect now, so that's fine.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Um, yeah, I think I agree with, everything that Derek said. You really you really got to have the support, because when you're coming from like starting from scratch, and let's say you got some small dollars, but then you move up to having like bigger dollars, it does take a lot of capacity and sometimes timing that you haven't accounted for. And you also have to having someone that can help you navigate budgets and reporting and things of that nature. That definitely makes a difference. So yeah, I think we recently received government funding, and that was a different change for us. And the capacity that it also takes is very different. And so I think really, having the support, having some folks that can walk alongside you, or having a consultant that already knows or have received funding can be a big help. Because if you go in doing it on your own, yeah, it's gonna take so much more of your time that you could have spent actually doing the work, versus having to spend so much time figuring out the grant and figuring out all the pieces that need to happen.
Thanks, Monica. And I'm going to come back to Pat's comment too, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things that Jackie's saying that also kind of ties into this overwhelming feeling. But I know that she's saying, also thinking about student interns. I think that's one of the biggest things we've seen for us that has been so helpful is, as an agency, just being able to bring on some of those student interns who need those hours and are willing to do the work. You just have to work with them and teach them. We have a whole youth program that Kendra, myself, and actually with Derek, we all work with. And so the students are working, in businesses all summer long. And the amount of growth within 4 to 6 weeks of those students. So, if you have students that can help, is really a big thing that could kind of take some of those burdens off of your agency, and not just filing and answering phones, because we have a tendency to want to do that, but they bring so much more to the table. So I definitely agree. Jackie also put a research opportunity for the State Employees Credit Union Foundation that people may want to look into. So I appreciate that as well as another possible funding opportunity. But I did want to also come back to your comment, Pat, because I think this is something that people miss. And so Pat mentioned that it's always important to kind of have that collaborative partner or partner to support the work of the project. I think that when we look at peer review, one of the things that we always see is that the funder wants to see who are you already working with. They want to see that you have those connections in the community. And if you show up with an application that our agency is going to do all the work, 99% of the time it will not be funded. So you do need to show that collaborative effort and show that it already exists. And so it goes back to that first comment Jackie made about building the relationships, because you literally have to have those. And I think somebody on the call, and I'm not meaning to call you out because I don't know Francis, but I wanted to call you out because Francis, I think that you do the most amazing work with having partners. Like Francis has so many partners that I can't keep up when we work with Francis on things. And I think that is so important, because it makes it where it's hard for a funder to say you don't deserve something because you have the whole neighborhood working with you, right? Yeah. And so I don't know if you have anything to speak to that part.
Well, part of our model is being able to empower the community to find, develop, and design their own solutions. And so we take that literally, and a lot of our direct service is provided by people with lived experience that literally grew up in the same neighborhoods as the youth that we serve. So that is a big part of it. So what we provide, and I'm laughing at this because we're very small. I represent JLBC Community Alliance, which was a grassroots ministry about 2 years ago when we started with juvenile crime prevention funding, and also we received some ARPA funding. And we went from grassroots ministry to federal recipient in about 18 months. But we provide the administrative piece so that the really small organizations that are your boots on the ground and community advocates can come to the table and be a part of that. And so we are both an economic generator and a community sustainability plan, as well as just, bigger footprint. And we offer something a little different than most programs that are working with really high risk kids because of that. But I will chime in behind the overwhelming part. And I will say that, we don't have a full-time employee. Everybody is part-time. We all wear 5 different hats. So where we have a problem and struggle, because we'll take whatever funding we can get, and a lot of times we do create a new project based on the fund that's out there. Like we have a community garden, but that opens up STEM, it opens up agriculture, horticulture, mental health, you name it. And so we went for that. But all of a sudden you get 3 or 4 grants that are $5,000, $10,000, and you're also managing $75,000, $100,000 grants. And it's when everything comes together and the reports are due and like your monthly stuff is going on, and then the 6-month thing goes on, and then the annual thing, and it all hits at one time with a very small staff. And that's when, like, my husband doesn't like me very much. Let's just be real.
Right. Thank you, Frances. I think all are such good comments. It's just hard when you're talking about things being overwhelming, because it's like it's always going to be, but how do we kind of manage it where it's not as overwhelming as it was? Because I feel like we would be lying to you if we say, oh, it's actually pretty easy to do all grant things. It's not, because funders are changing their requirements daily. What was required last week is completely different from what was required this week. Or Frances, I'm thinking about a situation with you. They tell you that you need a form, but they don't have the form anywhere for you to find or do. And it's like, you need that form to get the money, but they don't have the form anywhere. So it's like so many things, even just on their end.
And why is it that they have to hit every holiday?
And it's like, always that, right?
Always. There's not a single holiday that I have not spent head down with my chained to the computer. And I just think that,
that's
we all collectively tell them that's not okay.
Yes. I see Jackie also mentioned another way to handle sort of being overwhelmed is tapping into retirees that may be willing to dedicate 8 hours without pay every 2 weeks and see if they can increase as times evolve. That's another thing, is just volunteers. Trying to, Frances, you can't volunteer another minute. So I'm going to say no for you. I see you pointing that you can do
I did that. I've retired 3 times.
Look, just so everybody knows, Frances was retired, and now all of a sudden she's the ED of an agency. So we don't give Frances any more work to do. But no, I think that is a really, because sometimes I know, Pat, you've been one of the biggest people to just support everything I've ever been a part of related to human trafficking, and issues with women and children. And so always being there. And so I think that's a great point, is that people, but if you don't ask, they don't know that you need the help and the support. So next, if you all have any questions that you want to ask, we have about 15 minutes. I want to make sure that there's space for that. So feel free to be thinking of what those are, put them in the chat, or even say them out loud. I'm just going to ask Kendra a quick question and then come back to you all. Kendra, I know that you do a lot of the grants management side of things for us, for the KYS Consulting Group. And I think that a big part of what we've talked about is where to look for grants, you know, what happens when you get awarded grants, but we haven't really taken a deep dive on actually managing the funds, right? And so I really wanted to ask you, what are some of the pointers you might offer to some of the agencies on the call when they have been awarded funding, and, you know, how do they manage their grants? What should they do?
Yeah, so number one, I'll say, because like you just said, and like we've talked about, requirements change, right? So I think the first piece is just making sure that we understand what is allowable versus what is unallowable. Some things you may be able to purchase with a different grant, maybe a foundational grant versus a federal grant that, you know, you can kind of determine, you know, how to spend your funds. But I think just knowing what is allowable versus what's not allowable. Number two, I would say just making sure that you are on top of your budget. Okay, what do our line items look like? You know, where are we overspending, where are we underspending, and just making sure that we don't want to send any money back. We want to make sure that we are spending all of our funds that, you know, we have been awarded. So just making sure that we are looking at our budget monthly, just in case budget adjustments are needed, to make sure that we are spending those funds. I can't stress this piece enough. It's just making sure that you literally document everything. You keep everything, all receipts, time sheets, meeting notes. And I know today we are more in a virtual space, you know, everything is online, but if you need a folder, I use folders as well to make sure that I'm keeping track of, you know, all of the expenses, the receipts, the time sheets, just making sure that we have everything. But again, just building something that works for you, whether it is an internal system, or whether it is, you know, having that folder with all of your items in there. I think just making sure that you are not throwing anything away, just making sure that you have everything organized and together.
And that's a great point, Kendra, because there's a lot of funders, especially state and federal funders, that actually require you to keep your documents that you use for grants. Some say 5 years, some say 7, and some say 10. So if they come back 5 years later and want a receipt for something you bought, you know, a few years ago and you don't have it, unfortunately, they can ask for that money back. So I think that's really important, and something that we oftentimes don't think about. And Pat, I see that you mentioned, are there any factors in obtaining grants from the NC Community Foundation or Giving Circles? Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean?
Yes, at one point, when we were doing a lot of the human trafficking awareness, we learned that the community foundations had people who would donate, put their money into the foundation, and then they would review grant requests. And so you could submit a grant request to see if anybody might want to fund it, rather than going the opposite direction where they had something they wanted you to do. You're asking, would you fund what I want to do? And I just wondered if that has changed over the past 5 or 6 years since I was last tried to do that sort of thing.
No, I think that's a great question. I think with the North Carolina Community Foundation, from everything I've seen, they still are, they are a network of different, basically giving circles and smaller organizations that are giving money to donate, or I wouldn't say organizations, but more like corporate and places that are giving money to donate out to different projects. So I do see that, and I do see where they have an application process now. So it's a little bit different in the sense of they want people to actually apply, and they'll say this project with the, you know, Women's Club of Rocky Mount is open. So this is where you know, and they'll have like the application details. I will say that with a lot of the giving circles that you mentioned, what I see is still what you said, which is you can give them a short proposal that you want funded, and they can decide if they're able to fund it or not. So I think they're still in the space. I've seen, say, like the one in Winston-Salem, they a lot of times will put out what they're looking for in a deadline, but they don't give a whole lot of stipulations around it. It's more of send us what you have or what you're asking for, and we'll let you know if we can fund it. But make sure you send it by this date. And so I think a lot of the giving circles, I think the one in Asheville, does something a little bit similar, but I think it depends on what area they're in. Some of them, you just send them your application and you can say, this is what I want the money for. And I think that's such a good thought process too, because not everybody is where they can sit down and write big grant applications, but you can write a one pager to say what you're trying to have funded and how much you need to get that project up and running in your community. So thanks for that, Pat. Anything else about that?
I didn't know if there were any. I'm glad to know they now have a specific application for the community foundation, because before you didn't really know. And then also, I guess the other thing is they used to have a rubric to know how they were going to evaluate the applications that came in. Do most major fund grantors have that rubric, and how do you find it?
Yes, so that is an amazing question, Pat, because I think that is so important for people to understand that I don't think there is a single state federal funder that I have worked with that don't have one of those rubrics in place. And I would say majority of the foundations have those rubrics in place. They're all different, so that's the bad, the downside is everybody has one specifically to their agency. Even the federal funders, I'm like, y'all are funding the same thing. You can't just have the same rubric, but it's like it's worth 20 points over here, for your let's say your organizational capacity statement is 20 points over here and 5 over here. So it does depend on the agency, but I promise you that all of them do have a scoring rubric. Now, what I can say is that some of them list those in their request for proposals, which is what we all see as RFP, but it's a request for a proposal. A lot of them list that rubric in there. It might not be spelled out per se as a rubric, but it will say these are the things that we evaluate applications on. And I think to Pat's point, it is ideal, it is imperative that you read those things and know what they're scoring you on and how they're scoring you. Because even if you run out of time or you don't have all the things in the world to kind of put in that application, you want to make sure that the one thing, if you have to leave anything out, is that thing that costs, that scores 5%. Or 2 or 3%, not the 30% item. So you want to make sure that you are looking at those, and if they're not listed in their request for proposals, this is where that relationship with the funder that Jackie mentioned earlier comes in. You need to ask the funder. You can email them, you can ask them. It is not against any rules for you to see that scoring rubric that they have. Now, some foundations may not send it to you, and that's their right because they're private funders. But for the most part, when people, and with government, they're required to, everything is public record. So if they have a scoring rubric, really you have access to it. So I would say just asking if you don't have that. That's a great question, but a great point, Pat. What are some, and we have about 6 minutes left. So are there any other questions or comments that anybody else has too? Because we have other questions, but we want to make sure you get out your thoughts too.
I have one, Karika, if it's okay. And
Yes.
it's around risk assessment on the funder side. Like, we're a small organization. We are heading towards an ARPA cliff, like the ARPA funding that we had is running out. And there's always the sustainability question and what are the things that they're looking for us to show that we are worth the risk, or that, if they're doing a risk assessment, what do we have to pass?
And so I can definitely answer that, but I'm going to actually ask Jackie, because Jackie is literally working in that right now too. And I think that I will kind of just tag team with Jackie. Jackie, do you want to take on that one?
Sustainability, most of the time with the funder, really there is no sustainability, because the funders are not even, they're not even sustaining. I'm sitting here right now waiting for HUD to send us our notice. So the best logical answer I can provide to you with that is they just want to make sure that if they didn't give you the money, or if they had to be late on the money like we are now, are you going to be able to sustain and keep this program going? What they don't want to do is make this a one-time, you're using this money just for that. And we know that later on, it's like $100,000 just for 1 year. That's it. So, you know, and compared to the other people who are saying, hey, we can continue to support and maintain this program even without your funding. It's kind of like a catch-22. You're almost like, okay, I'm gonna tell you I don't need your money, but I need your money. And the funder is saying, hey, I want to make sure that I don't want to throw a lot of money into something that's only going to be in the community for 1 year. That's not the best use of the, you know, of the public's money. So you're really trying to say, I can hold on to it. I can maintain it, even if you're not getting it to me now. So that's what that sustainability is about.
Yeah, and I know you also, thank you, Jackie. And I know you also asked about risk assessment. Any thoughts on the risk assessment part too, Jackie? Because I think you covered sustainability, and then I can come in and help with the risk assessment too.
To me, risk assessment and sustainability, the same concept. Are we taking a risk by throwing this money to you and knowing that you're going to only be able to hold on to it and maintain this for 1 year? So those are the types of things they're looking at. And also with the risk assessment, looking at your staff capacity. You know, if you only have 3 people, then and we're asking you to submit monthly reports, then that's a possible risk. We know that from a you know, a certain point of view, and from the lens and saying, if you have limited staff, do you really have the capacity to provide the services, do these 5,000 reports we need you to do on time, and like you said, 10 to 50 other meetings. So that's, you know, they're looking at that as far as a risk also.
Yeah. And I would say just, I definitely agree with you. I think sustainability and risk are very closely aligned. I think the only other things I would add would just be some really key things to think about when they are evaluating sort of risk assessment initially. And I'm thinking about some of the state and federal funders that I work with a lot. And I would say that a big piece of that is literally thinking about not only your organizational capacity, like Jackie just mentioned, but one thing is if you're a new agency, you're already considered medium, you know, risk to them anyway, because you're a new agency to them. So they need to watch you a little bit harder. So I would think that the main thing that I would consider as a person who's kind of new to funding with an agency is making sure that you're getting your reports in on time. Because I think that we have a tendency to think sometimes when we do advocacy work or we're out in the field that a due date is a roundabout date. With federal funders and state funders, it is a automatic, your funding is stopped. We are not giving you any more money till your report gets in, you know, and we verified everything. So making sure that you don't miss deadlines, because deadlines being missed are huge things that can put a red flag on like, hey, they are going to be an agency that we have trouble with. Not getting your reimbursements in on time. I think that a lot of times people say, well, it's my money that I'm not, I've had so many people tell us like, it's my money that I'm not asking for. Why are they worried about it? Because that tells them that either A, you don't have the capacity to get your reimbursements in, or the other part for them is you're not spending your money. So why did I just give you $100,000 and 6 months into it, you've only spent 10,000? So that is a high risk situation, because the thing that they don't want to do is send any money back to wherever their source is, or have to say, we granted out all this money, but only spent 10% of it. I would say that's one thing I think Jackie and I used to talk about a lot when we worked together in state government too, is the number of times we've tried to, when we've been funding people, trying to tell agencies, figure out how to spend the rest of your money. You should not have any money left in your budget at the end of the year. That's why they have things like budget adjustments, figuring out how do you do a budget adjustment to move some money around to a category that you can still, you know, you can still get what you need, and it's still a part of the project, because you also don't want to go outside of the scope of your project, but making sure that you are spending your money down, because why should I give you another 100,000 when you only spent 10,000? So I would say those are some of the other things. And I see that we are right at time, and so do want to be respectful of everybody's time. And I see Jackie, communication is key. Absolutely. Because yes, we all have moments where we're going to be late. Just tell people, right? We appreciate everybody being with us. This is sort of the ending of our funding series, but we're always willing to do webinars on specific funding topics or something a little larger on this. But we also are starting a new series. So every season we're doing a series of webinars And so January through March, we're calling our winter season. And so we're going to be doing ones that are really geared towards working with youth. And then we'll be doing one in the spring. So if you're on our newsletter listserv, we'll be happy to send you out any of those webinars that we're doing. And we have some really great speakers who are going to be a part of that. So please join us, and we'll send out an evaluation afterwards. Please let us know if there are other topics that we can cover for you. But otherwise, if anybody has a final question, you can ask it now, or feel free to send us an email with those questions and we're happy to answer.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. It's good to see everybody.
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
You.
Bye.